Today we're going to work on the next stage. You created your pinch bowls last time and you've been learning how to slip and score things. Today we're going to move it to the next step. Hopefully you've done the homework where you've gotten the sheet that's on the Canvas site that tells you what the historical contemporary hand building project that this project is going to be about. So today I'm going to show you the method for starting the base of your construction for your sculpture or your vase or your object. I know that you have supposed to have submitted me sketches and ideas for your historical contemporary. Mixing of a historical object surface or form and a contemporary object surface or form and merging them into one and then putting your own alphabet or your own recipe into it to make it your own. So what I'm going to do today is just go over the basic construction of how to start structurally with coil slab technique to build height faster and to get a first stage of your construction with this. Now today I'm going to use a couple different tools. One, we're going to talk about turntables a little bit. If you get really interested in ceramics and especially sculpting ceramics, will be one of the most important tools that you can use. I have used these turntables like this one. They usually sell them in clay stores from anywhere from $18 to $20. You can also use old swivel chairs. I've used broken off chairs that I found at Goodwill where they just have the swivel part, and I've put a new board on the top real quick, and then I build my stuff. I've also used what they call lazy Susans for the kitchen, where any turntable that spins can work for this process. Just find something that turns and it'll help you along. Now, if you don't have one of these, hopefully you have your board or your bat to construct on. You can physically turn this as you go in your construction, especially if you have that piece of canvas or wherever you're working. You just keep moving it as you work. Between it and my clay, I usually put either the blue towel or a piece of newspaper. And eventually I replace the newspaper or the blue towel multiple times as this gets taller and taller and taller. So in case it starts turning black or it starts growing anything like mold, I'll throw this out, put a new one down, put the sculpture back on it, and continue working. And the reason for that is if you build your clay piece right onto this board, as it shrinks, it moves. The wood will not move with the sculpture. If you're using a piece of metal for some reason, or glass, or plexi, I've used plexiglass too, what happens is this stays this way, the clay piece shrinks, and then you crack the bottom. So you want your newspaper or your blue towel on there, because as your piece shrinks, it'll release from the board and then it won't break or crack on you. Okay. So to start my construction for coil slab, I have a ball of clay like we started with last time, but instead of a pinch bowl, I'm just going to pound it. And this is where any of my students who have worked with dough or pizza dough especially, one of my jobs during my BFA when I did my Bachelor of Fine Arts was working in a pizza restaurant and didn't realize how important it was to do that type of job for the physicality of starting a base in clay. So I've taken that ball of clay and I've blended it out. And if you watch, I'm dropping this at an angle. If you drop it straight down, it's going to get stuck. By picking it up at an angle, it stretches it, thins it out, and makes it even. Now the edge might be a little bit thinner, so what I'm going to do here is put my hand in the center, take my fettling knife, hold it like a pencil, and I'm going to turn the turntable to create my base. Now some of you will have sent me images of vessel forms or vase forms that have a bottom. Some of you might have sent me images that you might not need this. You might just build the coil slab on the edge, going straight up, and it'll be hollow underneath. And that's another process too. Today I'm showing how to put the bottom on this. But like I said, some of you, when I start doing the coil slab in a second, we'll talk about some of you might not need to do this step. But I'm going to go ahead and start with this step for the students that are going to construct from the bottom up. Or plan to make a vessel or vase form or a structure that needs a bottom so they can hold stuff. Now I am scoring this already, just like we did our pinch pots. And you'll watch, I'll be changing the angle of the fork as I go to tooth this up, to create a really strong textural surface for construction. Okay. Now excess pieces of clay, like this, what you want to do is just pound them back into the I usually pound them into little rectangles and then put them back under my blue towel. And rather than wedging them, this pounds it all back into this shape so I can use it later. Our clay bag comes as a square or a rectangle structure. So if you look at this, all I did was I cut these pieces off of one of those squares to make these smaller pieces. Okay. So I'm going to start making what is called a gravity feed coil and then turn it into a slab in just a second. So I'm going to take this piece of clay. I'm going to start pinching like I did the bowl, but now I'm pinching the whole piece of clay. And I'm going to start turning it into a coil. Now these coils can be bigger, smaller. I've made them all different sizes. I'm making a bigger one today just to show you how I'm going to build a wall with it. So again, just like when we made that little coil for the foot ring on your first pinch bowls, this is now the larger version of that. And as I work, I'm flipping it. So, and again, it's letting gravity pull on it naturally to get this shape. And with practice, you're going to end up with what is technically a pretty even coil. Now, if you decided to bite off more than you can chew, which I mean that you ended up grabbing a big piece of clay and now it's really uneven, let's say it got thinner in the middle again, just tear it off there and make that the end. And then continue working with the piece of clay, one piece, to make your coil. And you can again notice what part of my hand I'm using. I'm using the strong part of my hand here and cupping a little bit, and that's where the clay is just rolling in there and stretching out. I've had students over the years ask me, why do I do it this way versus making the coils on the table this way? And the usual reason is a lot of times they get flat that way. People push really hard, let up, push really hard, let up, and you end up with an even more uneven coil. Doing this, you just get a feel for it naturally to get this round form. Now, you have a coil. You'll notice it's actually pretty thick. I'm not making a little coil like I did on the foot ring. Now, I'm going to put it on the table. I'm going to take this part of my hand, and you can use either hand, and I'm going to turn it into, it's going to look like a belt. So my coil has now become the slab. I'm going to pick it up, tap the edges. Remember, that thickens up that edge for slipping and scoring. Then I'm going to stretch this again. Tap it again, tap it again. Now you'll see that it starts going down a little bit on the edges. So a lot of times I'll take the table edge if I'm working off a table, and I can see where it curves down right here, right here. And so that's where I'll cut. So I have the same even height. Again, these little pieces I'll put under the blue towel and then pound them in a little bit. Try not to waste all the clay that I have. Okay. So this piece is going to become the wall of this structure. So I'm going to take this, put it on my hand. You notice I've cut the 45-degree angles again, like the locking system we used on the foot ring. So I'm going to score this. Again, I'm going down, and then I'm going at an angle. Then I'm going back at the other angle to tooth this up. And remember, not to fork inward, because you'll make little air pockets. Put my slip on there. And then I'm going to put this onto my base. And I'm going to take my hand and tap. And then I'm going to start working the interior wall in. Again, just like the last time with the pinch pot, you'll hear popping sounds because it's me and the slip, I'm pushing the air pockets out. Bubbles. Now I'm going to pull this closer to me. Then I'm going to take the wood piece and pull it closer to me because I got to working on this wall right here. I want to work this foot or the bottom of this piece, the base, into the wall. If I don't do this, when we fire this, you'll end up with the bottom popping off. And then you'll end up with, you'll be like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And the clay teacher in me is going to tell you, well, We can try to put it back together with a little bit of glaze, or after it's all done, the sculpture side of me will tell you, well, that's why we may have epoxy. You can always glue it back together, those two pieces. Now, if it's a lot of pieces, that's going to be a little bit trickier. Now, I've toothed this up. So now this is all textured. So now, this is like I'm creating my own puzzle pieces. So this is the bottom of my puzzle. This is the first part of a wall of my puzzle. Now I got to work on the next piece of the puzzle. Now, I'm the one making the puzzle pieces. You know, you go to the store and you buy a puzzle and you have to match all those little pieces to fit right. These are you're making the pieces. So you're technically going to cut the pieces. So if it doesn't fit quite right, you just make the next piece of the puzzle to fit in the next part. You know, it's your solution. You are making the solutions to the puzzle pieces versus ones that are store-bought. So here's the next one. Same thing, tap the edges. Same thing, I want to use the edge of my table to mark, give me an idea. Sometimes you can see a little bit of unevenness at the top. I'm just going to cut that off. Again, save my little piece. Cut my angles. You can also pre-measure. You'll notice I'm missing a piece. I'm not quite there. So that means I got to make a little piece to go there to finish off this section of my puzzle. You know, one thing that you're going to notice is there's a lot of repetition. You do these steps over and over and over again, and eventually you get something that's going to be a lot bigger. Now, for the students who have had some clay background in high school, middle school, crafts places, you might have had the experience I had when I first did clay. My first ceramic teacher did not teach me this method. It was my second ceramic teacher. My first teacher taught me how to build with small coils all the way up. And it took me forever to make a piece that was 12 to 14 inches tall. With coil slab technique, the technique I'm showing you right now, my second teacher saw me building with coils and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm trying to build this big coil piece about this tall. She's like, why aren't you using coil slab? And she showed me this. And then it's just another way to work. That's a lot faster than just basic little coils or medium coils. So I'm back to fixing my seam. Now later on, like I said, we'll be changing this paper out. Then you can also adjust anything with your seam that you need to take care of. We really want to make sure that base stays onto this coil slab that you're adding. I'm also going to pinch it a little bit from like our pinch bowls. And that stretches it out, gives it a little bit extra height. Now I'm going to ignore that little section that's open right now. I'm going to score the top to get ready to build the next layer. Like I said, this process is a lot of repetition, and then you go back and forth. So if you have plans for texture or adding stuff to the outside, you'll get to about this height, then you'll start adding your designs to the outside as you go. If you wait till it's this tall, the bottom might be too dry to add your designs. So you want to work as you go. And I'll be showing you more demos as this gets bigger and grows. I'll be showing you more and more steps of how to approach different ideas. The other thing that's going to be occurring is as Ceramic 1 students send me their ideas, I'll be trying to merge some of the ideas that you're sending me into the demos to show you different ways to approach the different texture techniques or different things that you're trying to do to the piece that you're working on at home. So here's my next coil. One thing I will say, and I've already mentioned it before, remember I have a lot of practice doing this. Most of my sculptural work is done this way. So I work really fast once I start going. So you can see this one's a lot longer. So I'm going to cut the end off, both sides where it's a little bit shorter. Then I'm going to measure with my fingers. You know, if you look naturally, your fingers have lines. So I'm measuring to see that I need about 2 fingers worth, and I need to cut at those angles. And I usually cut a little bit bigger. Then I cut down to the size I need because I'm creating my own puzzle piece. I'm filling in the gap by creating my own puzzle. You know, of course, when you're building a puzzle, you don't cut up the pieces to make sure they fit, or else you end up with a pretty interesting abstract image. Here, this is a puzzle that exists right now in your head and maybe in sketches, and now you're working on creating reality out of it. So there, I finished this gap. Now once you get the base on and the first ring on, this gets a lot easier, especially if you're starting with a foundational base. Now let's say you plan to have no base. Then you're just going to build like we did the foot ring before. You're going to build like this with it open at the bottom because you're not planning on it to have anything inside it. And that's fine too. So I'm going to score this little spot. Now I've added clay. This is where this seam ended. This is where this seam ended. So I'm going to show you a little trick of the next step. So I'm going to take the rest of this, score it really quickly. In workshops, I don't have a lot of time. It's like they bring you in, you work for half a day or a whole day doing something, and then you're gone. And so I've built, with coil slab technique like this, I've built pieces up to 2.5 feet tall in a 3-hour session, about this tall, really quickly. Now we don't want to work that quickly because I want you guys to learn timing of clay for leather hard for sculpting too. You know, just saying, you just have to deal with what space and time allows. So here you can see is my next layer, my next wall. So I'm going to tap it down. Then I'm going to turn this so you can see. I'm going to push up and then down and then start working that seam together. And I usually use my thumb a lot more than my fingers. So again, notice my other hand's on the inside as a support so I don't sink it in. And we just work and work and build and smooth. The other thing is this tool here is really cool because normally people think of these as tools on the wheel. This is the shape of a bowl as you're throwing. But for me, I use these tools a lot, and they have been used historically a lot by potters or clay artists and sculptors to really, really smooth out the outer edge and the inner edge to work things really well together. They're like a longer version of a finger. So I'm going to continue smoothing out this edge. Again, you want to really work these edges together, or the two pieces together. That way you have a strong bond. I used to build large coil heads that were 50 to 100 pounds without slipping and scoring. It was just using hand pressure. And I was like, I always tell students, it was the hubris in me, if you know what hubris means. It was my pride. I was like, oh, I can push this stuff together. They won't pop apart. And then I literally watched 1 or 2 of my big sculpture coil heads just split apart at every seam. After that, everything got slipped and scored. I haven't had them pop apart like that again. Okay, we're going to add one more layer to finish off this section. And then you can see that I've been working on smoothing out the interior. Back to this tool that's part of your toolkit. Again, notice how I put my hand on the outside. And then just smooth it up. Okay, and pinch a little bit. We'll take the next piece, pinch. Again, you'll watch me flip them. And what happens if you don't flip them, the middle gets really thin. Because the weight just pulls down on the middle. So I'm always flipping these guys as I build. So you can see sometimes I make them a lot longer than I need. But that's okay because as you've been watching, I cut the extra pieces off and save them. Later on, I'll wedge them all back together and reuse them for something else. So here I'm going, and I can see from above, I'll move this forward so you can see. From above I can see where I need to cut. So take this, and I can see the angle there, and I'm just going to bring the knife next to it and then just cut. And you can see now I'm attaching those two themes in just a second. So back to scoring. And slip again. And put this piece on. Same thing, once I have this set where I want it, I'm going to tap it a little bit. I'm going to work on this upper seam too. And you can see I'm working a little bit thicker, and you'll see why in a second. So again, using my hand to start melding the clay together, smoothing components together. Again, I'm using that tool to spatulate, smooth it out. Then I'm going to work on the inside a little bit. Now, if you notice, my hand's this shape again, like when we were doing our pinch pulls. Because what I'm doing is I'm stretching the clay out, and I'm going to pinch this a little bit. And that stretches out the thickness, and it gives me a little extra height. And usually I build 2 or 3 layers, and then I put it away. And the reason for that is I gotta let this part set up so I can add the next layer, but I can still sculpt to this. If this part gets too dry, it'll be hard to add to, or to add to the surface, or sculpt the surface, or texture the surface. The other thing is, if it's too wet and I add a lot of weight above it, this will get fatter and fatter this way. It'll round out on you, and then it'll want to collapse like a big paper bag. I'm trying to teach you guys the timing of the material. Now, I'm going to take my shop towel. This one's still wet. I'm going to tear it in half. Then I'm going to wrap the other upper 1 to 2 inches inside and out with the shop towel. And then I'm going to take my plastic bag, wrap this with the open part of the bag underneath, put the weight of this on the open part of the bag to make this into a damp little bag, little damp box area. That way this will stay soft enough for me to work on next time. You know, I don't want this to dry out. I don't want to lose all the work that I just created. So you want to make sure to seal everything up really well. The opening of the bag underneath the weight. That way it traps the air in there. And make sure your bag doesn't have any holes in it. Make sure the plastic bag has no holes in it. I've had students accidentally have a tiny little hole. And since we're in Arizona, it dries really fast with any little hole. So we're going to seal this up. And then next time I'll be adding more layers to it, and we'll be talking about surface a bit more.